On Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Waltz, which, as you all know, is the name of Trump's national security advisor. Now, Goldberg writes, I did think it was somewhat unusual, given the Trump administration's contentious relationship with journalists and Trump's periodic fixation on me specifically. It immediately crossed my mind that someone could be masquerading as Waltz in order to somehow entrap me. It's not at all uncommon these days for nefarious actors to try to induce journalists to share information that could be used against them. That does happen. We're going to talk about that. But the story continues, because then 2 days later, Goldberg got a notification that the Waltz account had added him to a group chat called the Houthi PC Small Group. Now, PC in the national security world typically stands for Principals Committee, which is typically made up of literally the highest ranking national security officials in government. Just to give you kind of a sense of how high ranking the people in the chat were, there was a user named MAR, as in Marco Antonio Rubio, the Secretary of State, and another user named JD Vance. There was also a Scott B from Treasury, I think we know who that is, and a user named Pete Hegseth from the Pentagon. And yet, as Goldberg wrote, I had very strong doubts that this text group was real, because I could not believe that the national security leadership of the United States would communicate on Signal about imminent war plans. I'd have a hard time believing that too. I think anybody who spent time around national security information and government and reporting on it would too. Because at this level, the discussion about this level of sensitive issues is only supposed to happen on a few different channels, a few different ways. Usually they happen in what's called a SCIF, which stands for Sensitive Compartmentalized Information Facilities, hence SCIF, because it's much easier to say and remember. But that's basically where computers storing classified information can be accessed. It's where conversations about things like war plans and even topics that are a whole lot less sensitive should happen. SCIFs are where the situation room is. And they're so sensitive and so secure that you can't even bring in your phone, your Apple Watch. They literally make you take it off. AirPods, any electronic device you can't bring into a SCIF. And most of these officials pretty much always have access to these facilities. I mean, the vice president and high-level national security officials even have SCIFs set up in their homes. And whenever they travel, on domestic trips, on international trips, they have SCIFs set up there too. A vice president could say to a staffer, I need to make a secure call, and the staffer can set that up, just to give you all a sense of this. But instead of engaging over proper channels, these officials all chimed in about pending military strikes on a group chat. Of course, by this point, according to Goldberg, the discussion about these war plans as this chat continued was getting pretty specific and incredibly sensitive. And what came next was even more stunning. Because at 11:44 on Saturday morning, Goldberg got a text from the user Pete Hegseth that started with an all-caps note, team update. Now, here's how Goldberg described what he was seeing, because I think it tells you a lot. He says in his piece, I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent texts. The information consumed in them, if they had been read by an adversary of the United States, could conceivably have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel, particularly in the broader Middle East, Central Command's area of responsibility. What I will say, this is continuation of his reporting, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this Signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. I just have to pause on this for a moment, because the level of sensitivity of that kind of information is typically not seen by many officials in the government, no matter what your level of security clearance is. This was done, again, over a group chat. So the point here is also that it was a matter of time, really, before Goldberg would know whether or not these messages were legit, because there was so much detail and so much about timing and operational details in these group chats. And he also wrote that it was possible Houthi targets would soon be bombed. And sure enough, when the time came, Goldberg checked X or Twitter, whatever you're calling it these days, searched Yemen, and explosions that then were being heard across Sanaa, the capital city. And then one account after another started posting celebratory reactions and messages on this same group chat, including a fist, flag, and fire emoji from the account identified as Mike Waltz, otherwise known as the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. And so finally, after everything he had just witnessed, Goldberg was pretty sure that this was the real thing, and we're going to talk to him more about this in a moment. And he wrote, "The Signal chat group I concluded was almost certainly real. Having come to this realization, one that seemed nearly impossible only hours before, I removed myself from the Signal group. No one in the chat had seemed to notice that I was there, and I received no subsequent questions about why I left, or more to the point, who I was." And then this morning he sent emails to several people who were on the Signal chat. People like Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, John Ratcliffe, the Director of the CIA, others. And he asked them some pretty freaking valid questions, like, is the Houthi PC small group a genuine signal threat? Did they know that I was included in this group? Was I on the off chance included on purpose? If not, who did they think I was? Did anyone realize who I was when I was added or when I removed myself from the group? Do senior Trump administration officials use Signal regularly for sensitive discussions? Do the officials believe that the use of such a channel could endanger American personnel? Some serious questions for a serious issue and breach here. And here's the statement he got back from the spokesperson for the National Security Council. And I'll just say here, having been in these worlds, when you ask the principals, the cabinet members who were on this chat, the cabinet members for something about what they did, and you get a response from the spokesperson of the National Security Council, it's because the cabinet members don't want to answer the question. So I'll tell you that. This appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. The thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials. The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troops or national security. That, my friends, is what we call pure gaslighting from the Trump administration. Now, just as a reminder, this was a group chat that could have taken place, as Goldberg notes in his piece, on phones while these officials were wandering around in public. Remember, they were talking about the most sensitive national security information, some of what our government has. And all the while, they were doing it with Jeffrey Goldberg right there on the chat. Quite a story, and I didn't even tell you all of it. And joining me now for his first Cable News interview since finding himself in that group chat is Jeff. You've been covering national security issues for a long time. And
longer than you've been alive, probably.
I don't know about that.
Well,
you're not 100, but
not
yes,
100.
for quite a long time. So I just tried to do justice to your story there, which, as I noted, I read many times. You can see my highlighting, my notes, my questions.
A lot of work went in there.
Well, you know, once and always. What did I miss and what did I get wrong?
No, you got the. I think you got the main themes of it. The unreality of it, I think, is something that's very hard to capture. I have a hard time explaining the unreality of it because, as you note, you've been on one side of that divide. I've been on the other. The national security world is a pretty serious world, and especially at the level below the principals, there are people who take their responsibilities extremely seriously and take security and safety and cybersecurity and digital security very, very seriously. And there are people, we both know of people who've gone to prison for mishandling sensitive information. And so, one of my problems, and I've been, asked this question a few times today, it's why did you have such a hard time believing this? And the answer is because it's unbelievable. I mean, I've never experienced this through, the pre-9/11 period, 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. These are life and death issues, and you don't just put out specific targeting information, specific timings of attacks that have not yet taken place into a commercial messaging app. And so I obviously convinced myself, as I state in the story, that this was a disinformation operation of some kind. Somebody, a state actor, non-state actor, I don't know who.
We're trying to entrap you.
We're trying to entrap me or fool me or couldn't figure out what the actual motive was. That was the one of the hard parts. But I wanted to understand, what was going on here. At the end of the day, the most obvious explanation that it's just real was, for most of the time I was following this, the most improbable, because I had never seen senior government officials act this way.
It is so stunning. I mean, I think anyone who's worked in the national security space in any way thought it reminds them of moments. It reminded me of a moment I read the Russia memo. I was just telling you this on Russia's engagement, Russia's intervention in the election in 2016. The very last day I was in the Obama administration, I had to check it out. It was a numbered copy. It was a printed copy. I had to read it in a skiff and give it back.
Yeah.
And there's a seriousness with which most national security officials in government take these issues. Yeah. Let me ask you, one of the things that struck me is that the information showed, you mentioned the specifics of the war plan's operational details.
Right.
There was also, John Radcliffe, who has been in government before, who has had access to national security before, he was on this chain, director of the CIA. He shared, reportedly, according to your reporting, the details of someone you didn't name because you know well enough not to share information like this, of somebody who was sounded like a covert operative.
So what happened at the beginning of this chain was the principals, the cabinet level people, were asked by Mike Waltz, who is going to be your point of contact in the next 72 hours when we move toward a strike against the Houthis, right? I'm reading this and I'm like, they're really talking about a strike against the Houthis. Radcliffe names, other people name other people who are publicly named public figures. Radcliffe names a person. I'm not going to say the name. The whole real name of this person, who is going to be his liaison. In the course of my reporting and trying to understand, I came to understand that this is an active CIA officer. Name has never been in public before, who is
everyone on the chain may not have had need to know who this was.
Well, yeah, because remember, the chain is pretty big. The chain is not just 5 intelligence officials or 4 defense officials. It's defense, intelligence, treasury. It's the chief of staff of the White House. It's people who certainly don't need to know the names. As you know from the classified world, from the secret world, the less you know, the better, right? The less you have to go to sleep with at night, the better off you are. In many ways, you can't get into trouble from not knowing something that you shouldn't know, and so I have to say, somewhat astonished that he would put this official's name into what is essentially an open channel. Forget the fact that he, like everyone else, had no idea that they were sharing that information with the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine,
right,
in the same chain, because nobody had asked during the course of this, who is this JG? My initial showed up as JG.
And you don't know who that, do you know who that is at this point?
I have no idea. I have no idea who, in other words, who Mike Waltz was looking for? I don't know. He didn't answer that question for me.
The thing about signal chats is you have to invite people, you have to list the names to create a group. So there was a conscious just adding of you to this group.
Yes.
There's been a lot of effort to respond. I noted, as I just kind of gave the summary of the piece, you got a response from the National Security Council spokesperson. No.
Oh, yeah, and every agency has been saying, just ask the National Security
Council. Just ask them, punting it to them.
Well, what's going on you could read the tea leaves here. It's Mike Waltz put this group together, not me. Don't ask me, ask him. That's what's going on.
But every one of those individuals should have known that they shouldn't be having these conversations.
Look, we all like to think that we're really good at digital hygiene, but most of us are not good at digital hygiene. And if there's a lesson here, a lesson for a normal person living in the world, it's know who you're texting with. It's kind of basic. And by the way, if you're running a major intelligence operation or the Pentagon, maybe you should know how to operate in a digital environment.
And you said you haven't seen a breach like this. You just said that. You've covered...
There have been a lot of breaches. There's been a lot of leaks. There's been a lot of stolen, cases of stolen documents. I've never seen a large group of senior-most national security officials just kind of willy-nilly put out a bunch of stuff, without knowing who they're talking to.
They've been punching you and others to the National Security Council spokesperson statement, which I will talk about in a second too. But in the last hour, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reacted to your story after landing for a trip to Hawaii. He didn't initiate the chain, but he had a lot to say on the chain, it seems. Reporters
He had
asked
the most sensitive things to say.
He had the most sensitive things to say, including the kind of war detail plans that you didn't even include in your reporting because you didn't want to put operational details in your reporting.
Look, I mean, we can say this now. We know American pilots are involved in this operation. That's very, very dangerous work. I found out about this as a civilian 2 hours before the operation launched. The last thing I want, even as a reporter who wants to know about government decision making, obviously, the last thing I want is to see American lives endangered in any way.
Which is why you didn't include it, and this is why it could have been many people on that chain, which is part of the thing I think that should be explored. Let me play what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had to say.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
I don't expect you're going to respond to every aspect of that, but nobody was texting war plans. Again, you have extensive reporting. Anybody can read it. What is your reaction to that?
Look, I'm going to be responsible here and not disclose the things that I read and saw. I will describe them to you. The specific time of a future attack, specific targets, including human targets, meant to be killed in that attack, weapon systems, even weather reports, that the government is I don't know why Hegseth was sharing it with everybody. I mean, the precise detail, and then a long section on sequencing. This is going to happen, then that is going to happen. After that happens, this happens, then that happens, and then we go and find out if it worked. I mean, he can say that it wasn't a war plan, but it was a minute by minute accounting of what was about to happen, organized by CENTCOM, Central Command, which is the military oversight group of the Middle East, the broader Middle East. This is their plan, and he was taking their plan and sharing it with a bunch of civilian leaders. It's interesting because as I'm reading it at 11:44 a.m. on Saturday morning, the 15th, seeing that the Houthis are not going to know about this for another couple of hours.
And you know about it.
Well, and I know about it, and I'm thinking to myself, honestly, I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm glad that Mike Waltz didn't invite a Houthi into the group or a Russian spy or an adversary of the United States. But put that aside. I'm reading this and I'm wondering, not only why am I reading this, but why would the Secretary of the Treasury need to know the precise attack sequence of this upcoming operation? Again, I don't want to talk about weapon systems, packages, targets in any specificity because, I'm trying to be, I want to be a responsible person, and I'm more interested in the decision making anyway than I am in the actual technical details of it. But the whole thing is just very flummoxing to me because I haven't seen this kind of unserious behavior before. And the Secretary of Defense, all due respect, in that presentation seems like a person who's unserious and is trying to deflect from the fact that he participated in a conversation on an unclassified commercial messaging app that he probably shouldn't have participated in.